You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We are now joined by another candidate for the Illinois 13th Congressional District. Regan Deering now joins us. Thank you so much for being on the show this week.
Great. Nice to meet you, Cole. Thank you for having me and giving me a chance to talk to your viewers.
Absolutely. So I want to start here. This is the same question I asked your competitor, Jesse Rising, in the previous block of the show, but the 13th Congressional District has been held by Rodney Davis for a number of years, and when he held that office, it was often described as a Republican winning a district drawn for Democrats. That was what people always would classify that as. And now that the 13th has been redrawn again, it's seemingly become even more of a Democratic-heavy district. The data shows that it's even more in favor of President Biden, for instance. Why do you believe that a Republican can win in this district?
Well, Rodney Davis is my current congressman and I think has done a great job representing voters in the 13th district. And as a Republican candidate, I will continue that same message of being able to represent all throughout the district. In fact, the gerrymandered 13th, which got an F- rating, is more Democratic leaning than it sits currently after the remap. But I do believe that this year, more than ever, voters in this district want someone who is going to be hearing their concerns and sharing their message in Washington. We've got big problems that have been brought on by this administration. And I know that my experience in Decatur as my home, as well as the surrounding areas, will allow me to take that message and meet those people right where they are, bring good policy, good funding back to Illinois 13th. And so regardless of the polling and the numbers and how the Democrats have tried to gerrymander this district, I think that we need a representative that is going to work for the people.
What made you get into this race? What was the inspiration, I guess, for you wanting to take over this office in particular?
Well, I know that we have an open seat in the 13th right now, and conversations with my family and friends locally and throughout Central Illinois have centered around what's happening in Washington and why we have politicians that seem to be so disconnected. Illinois is my home, Decatur is my home, and I want to be able to make good change for my family as I'm a voter. And I know that those citizens here want somebody that's got that real world experience, can show up in Washington and make progress and not just noise. So for me, I had engaged in a lawsuit against Governor Pritzker. For my family, I felt like I wasn't being heard and my parental rights were being denied with his executive order and the mask mandate in schools. I showed up at my school board meetings. I tried to do what I could as far as fighting for my family, and I didn't like the response I got. So the next step for me was joining a lawsuit, and hundreds of parents from around the state came together and stood up and said no. And we did get a great win in court. And I feel like the response from those in my community that said, thank you for standing up and taking a message to leadership that was really in an overreach position and getting a win that best benefited our communities.
You mentioned that, part of this, you want to, improve circumstances for your community, for your family. A lot of voters may not know this. Your family is pretty prominent in the Decatur area. I believe your family started ADM, correct? The company that obviously has a pretty major base set up in Decatur.
Yes, so the Andreas name is well associated with Archer Daniels Midland. It's home base in Decatur and has had a great history and continues to provide great opportunities for working and innovation and talking about Central Illinois on the global stage. So that's a legacy I'm super proud of. I know that we have had a legacy of service in our communities too. So a lot of that ties into why I feel like I've got good connection to this district and want to run for office.
Are you affiliated with that company right now, or are you separate from it?
No, I don't have any affiliation with ADM. Got
it, okay. So I wonder, you mentioned a few times the big issues that you want to take to Washington. You talked about, obviously your lawsuit with Governor Pritzker, but what are the key issues that you see that you think are top of the line items for not only yourself, but the people you hope to represent?
Sure. Well, that lawsuit really, for me, was driving home the individual freedoms and less government interference in our everyday lives. So that's a message I intend to take to Washington that covers a multitude of topics. I think that The biggest concern for our voters right now is inflation and cost of living here. It's at an all-time record high. And so I know that we've got to be able to look at other ways that we can support our families, support our economies. But most importantly, we need to have legislators that are going to stand up to this reckless spending that's helping drive up these costs and crushing our middle class and disproportionately affecting our seniors and our low-income families as well.
When you talk about government overreach in that way, are you strictly talking about, when we're with the pandemic? Because obviously that was a pretty unique, special circumstance in the crisis that the country was facing, or does this also extend to other matters when, if we're talking about gun control, for instance?
Well, I think that the people feel as though there is that disconnect between their legislators and policy coming out of Washington, and a lot of it does feel like an overreach. I mean, the pandemic was a perfect example of top-down leadership that was kind of pushing to the extreme of lockdowns, and that was hurting our communities and our businesses and our relationships as well. But when you talk about small businesses, whether that's COVID or not, there's a lot of overtaxing, there's a lot of overregulation. We have multiple layers of government, and it seems as though the people are more concerned with doing their good work and being able to provide for their families. So when I talk about government overreach, it does include a lot of facets.
I kind of alluded to gun control in that last question, but obviously that's one of a couple of big topics facing the, Congress right now. That's a big debate happening in DC. I wonder if you were to not only make it through this primary, but also be elected to Congress, where are your stances on some of these policies, whether it be red flag laws or universal background checks, or just your overall stance on gun access in America?
Well, this is an important conversation, and it's hard to know that when we have a rash of gun violence incidents, it becomes a very emotional topic. I applaud those in the state Senate, or excuse me, the federal Senate right now that are coming together for bipartisan conversations. I have heard some comments from both sides about what kind of talks are happening and what legislation might come out of those talks. I think for me, I'm hoping to find a middle ground where we can protect our rights and our Second Amendment access to defend our families and our property, but also limiting access to, to weapons that are going to be used by those with an agenda. I think that we need to have the conversation about mental health. We need to have a conversation that is talking about legislation that leads to outcomes. That's really important to me. So I will wait and see, like the rest of us, what comes out of our current legislators and their conversations, and we'll go from there. But it does need to be a conversation that is had at all times.
The other major topic, obviously, just from this past week, we had the start of the January 6th committee releasing their findings, obviously taking a primetime slot on Thursday. I wonder what your thoughts are, I guess, first of all, on just to get this out of the way, this has been a question posed to a lot of Republicans running for office, but who do you believe won the 2020 presidential election?
Well, we have Joe Biden serving as our legal president right now, so that answers that question.
Okay, does that mean just judging by your wording of that, do you subscribe to some of the election fraud theories that have been posed and debunked in a lot of cases?
Well, I think election integrity is at the top of mind for all. We need to be making sure that our voters feel like their vote counts and that they have a role in the democratic process. Every time we have an election, you're going to have a winner and a loser, and the other side is always talking about election integrity. We have seen lots of incidences of legislative rules that were broken in the 2020 election. Universal mail-out ballots was obviously ripe for fraud, and we have seen instances of that. So I think that Americans want to get back to feeling like their vote matters and that we are making sure that we're counting every legal vote and continuing the democratic process and the will of the people.
What are your thoughts on just the investigation that we're seeing on Capitol Hill into the Capitol attack, into January 6th? What were your thoughts on that hearing from earlier this year?
Well, Rodney Davis, being my current congressman, has obviously had a big seat at the table in his committee, and looking at the investigation that's come through since the days leading up to the January 6th and the days following. I know that he did talk about voting for a bipartisan committee to investigate what happened at the Capitol that day. And I think what we have playing out on television right now is not a bipartisan committee. So it concerns me as a legislator when we know that as representatives, we have a duty to get answers for the people and provide oversight. I just am really disheartened by the fact that what we've got today is not what was intended.
Do you believe there are answers that still need to be found in the matter of January 6th? Do you, when there's obviously questions posed about what instigated this, who was kind of the driving force, things like that? Do you feel like those are still questions that need to be asked and investigated?
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to watch what was broadcast yesterday, so I will continue to follow along. I do think that we have committees in place and we have oversight and we have investigation, and I do hope they get to the bottom of it so we can prevent it from happening again.
Got it. Before we go, last question, just a little over 2 weeks until the voting day, until voters head to the polls. What is the strategy for your campaign? I know you said your home base is currently in Decatur, that is correct?
Yes, so we're all the way down here coming to you all today from Madison County, and we have come up through St. Clair County, and we're heading to Macoupin County this evening. So our message is still trying to reach voters and know that I want them to vote for me as a great candidate that's going to represent them and bring their concerns to Washington, that I'm a resident of Central Illinois and I'm staying here in Central Illinois. I'm fighting for my family and I'm fighting for theirs as well. So these next 3 weeks, we will continue door knocking, we'll continue calling folks, we'll continue showing up at events and talking to key stakeholders and just spreading our message of a representative like me going to Washington to make some change.
In order to win this race, especially when we're talking about, Jesse Rising, for instance, he's received a couple key endorsements from Central Illinois Republican parties, including Sangamon County. But when we're talking about competing against him, in order to win this race, do you feel like you need to be more conservative than him? Is that a bar that you're trying to reach in that way, or do you feel like that's not the case?
No, I'm running my own race. I know who I am and what I stand for, and the relationships that I've built in my own community and the conversations I've had with voters about why I'm the best candidate to go to Washington and represent Central Illinois. Like I said, this is my home. I want to stay here. I want to fight for great policy and great economies here in Central Illinois. And so that will continue to be my message. I hope that they will vote for me, knowing what I stand for.
All right, Regan Deering, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be right back.